everybody. Welcome back to Beer and Money. My name is Ryan Burklow.
And I'm Alex Collins.
And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about alternative investments and whether or not or when you should possibly look at owning them. But before we dive into that conversation, Mr. Collins, what are you drinking today?
Today, I am drinking West Side Connection. It's an IPA, shocking, from Skookum Brewery up in Arlington, Washington. I've had this a few times. It's a solid little beer.
I've never had that one, so I'll be interested to see what your thoughts are. Oh, you had it before, so you like it clearly.
Yeah, I mean it's that Northwest IPA where like you get that dry hop and it's just a very solid beer.
Awesome. I picked up Widmer Brothers Imperial Hefeweizen. The funny story behind this is Alex and I knew we were recording today, and the only time that I had to grab a beer was at 9:30 this morning. And it didn't cross my mind until I walked into the grocery store. Keep in mind, this is my local grocery store, and thinking, oh crap, it's 9:30 in the morning. If someone that I know or worse yet is a client of mine that walks in and sees the advisor buying. So long story short, it's Widmer Hefeweizen. It was a funny story, I thought. I always enjoy Hefeweizens. Now, this is an Imperial Hef, which is the other kicker because it's 8% alcohol by volume. Have you ever had this, Alex?
Yes, I have. Imperial or Widmer Hefeweizen is it's a great beer.
Yeah, no, it's a solid hef, and as the name says, Imperial, it always has that extra punch of alcohol in it, so it's a solid one. I think I'm going to nurse this one a little bit here, but solid beer. Definitely check them out.
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever had the Imperial version.
No, you should check it out. It's you can definitely taste the alcohol, but so it's not one that you're going to sit in the backyard in the summer and drink a couple. You might just have one. So, well, let's dive in today. So, because I think people hear about alternative investing quite often because it comes in the news in different fashions, and I don't know that many
all over the news.
Yeah, I was trying to think in general, not necessarily right now, but I don't think many people actually know what it is. And so, in its simplest definition, is an investment that doesn't fall into the traditional investment category like stocks, bonds, cash.
Right.
It's more of, maybe you've heard of private equity. Gold is oftentimes brought up as well. Structured notes. So there are, it's an investment vehicle that is not that traditional vehicles that I just labeled.
REITs or real estate investment trusts, limited partnerships. There's a boatload of stuff that falls in, like cryptocurrency to a certain extent falls into this category. There are a whole boatload of different things that fall into the category of alternative investments.
And what I also find interesting is I think people will think of it for two different reasons. A primary reason is almost a vehicle of getting more return on your money.
That's a possibility for sure.
And I'm not saying, thank you for saying it's a possibility. Thank you for compliance there. But I think it's brought up in that capacity. Or they use it as an investment vehicle that's not correlated with the market, or at least that's how they try to portray it.
Now, well, and that is exactly where it winds up creating more value, is if you have something that is not correlated directly with the other more typical investments of stocks, bonds, and cash. Now you can go ahead and try to keep a relatively high rate of return, but have less correlation. And what that will wind up doing is it'll wind up driving down your standard deviation. The whole idea and point
real quick,
and
Alex,
purpose.
let's pause for a second because it just hit me. I like to use jargon from time to time. We're using the word correlation and we're using the word standard deviation. While I think separately people understand it, but when we're talking about the market and assets, let's define what we mean by correlation.
Sure. Correlation is how much things move together or separately. So a correlation of one, positive one, would mean that as one investment goes up, the other investment goes up in lockstep. Maybe not the same amount or same magnitude, but it is the same ratio. If they are perfectly negative correlation, that is a negative one correlation, and they move in exact opposite directions. Um, People might think that you want things to be positively correlated. You don't. You want either zero or negative correlation, because that then adds value. If you have two things, two investments that both have an expected rate of return of 8, for example, and are perfectly negatively correlated, well, you can just mix those in 50-50 ratio, and you're going to be essentially guaranteed an 8% rate of return. Now, for
If
compliance purposes, that
if
doesn't
that
exist.
it doesn't
And
exist exactly.
but that is the whole point and purpose of trying to find things that are negatively correlated. Is if you're able to go ahead and find things that stay perfectly negatively correlated, then you can wind up being able to go ahead and lock in returns, which is usually a really, really good thing. So the less correlated things are, the better they are from a diversification standpoint. We need to take a look at expected rates of return and risk and liquidity and all sorts of other things we're going to talk about in this episode. But that is what we're talking about when we're talking about correlation. Standard deviation is a measure of risk. So if we're getting an expected rate of return of 8 and we have a standard deviation of 8, well, then 2/3 of the time that investment is going to be between 0 and 16. And then we can like do math to figure out like, okay, one standard deviation, two standard deviations, three standard deviations, and figure out like, okay, what actually is the variance between these things, and what are we looking at when we
We
use
use
the
standard
term.
deviation. We oftentimes like people will say, "Well, I'm a risky person," and then we say, "Okay, define risky. Like, can you give me a measurable risk that you're?" And that's where most people will look you like, "What do you mean?" Like they don't understand that. So, Alex and I take an academic approach where we can actually run the standard deviation and say, "Okay, so with X amount of dollars, you have to be okay with losing 37% of it." With the possibility of gaining 38% or whatever the standard deviation comes out to, which is a much different conversation because I think people are like, oh, I'm okay with risking some of my money, but they don't understand how much of it is being risked.
Right. When you start taking a look at the expectations of like, okay, well, so when we've got a standard deviation of 8, for example, okay, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And then starting to be able to put it into terms of like, oh, well, that means that less than 5% of the time we should be down more than this percentage. Oh, wait, so you still mean that there's like a 5% chance that I could be down worse than that? Yeah. Oh, I'm not that risky. Okay. And these are the conversations that we want to have ahead of time so that, we're able to, when we talk about investments, most of the time we're talking about it as though it's like a roller coaster ride. We want the roller coaster ride to be as exciting and entertaining as possible for you without causing you to puke. Because if you puke on a roller coaster, everybody's having a bad day.
Yeah. And it's true what they say. It's about behavior, right? If you understand what the risks you're taking and you're working with, a coach or advisor, however you want to label them, and you can stay invested, now you've got a much better chance of being financially successful. Whereas if that roller coaster ride, to Alex's point, is maybe it's got one extra loop de loop that you don't want, and you got to get off the ride. Now it's an issue. So
Right.
so that's what we mean by standard deviation. So sorry, I cut you off there, Alex, when you were going there,
Nope.
but I wanted to make sure
You went
we
the same place I
define
was
that.
headed.
So now we discussed, or at least labeled, alternative investments. The next question that I think most people have is, okay, should I invest in them? And you and I have, I just saw you, give me for those who are listening, Alex gave me the smirk that we will give each other. And it's right. He wanted to say it depends. But what it comes down to is we were just talking about the roller coaster ride. And that roller coaster ride is a lot like the crazier that ride is, you can stay on the ride, the better your balance sheet looks.
Yep.
The worse your balance sheet looks and or feels, the harder it is to stay on the ride. So what does your balance sheet look like? And these are the key things that we would have you look at before you even considered alternative investments.
Well, and like there's certain thresholds that we need to meet and exceed before we can even
Well, whether or
start
not you
looking
can
at
even,
these things.
yeah, exactly. That's a whole nother conversation. But yeah, so balance sheet setup. So if we're going to start with everyone's favorite savings account, emergency fund, and I say that sarcastically. Um, more and more people, I don't know about you, Alex. When I'm sitting down with clients, I think they interchange emergency fund and liquidity. I think they
Right.
combine it, and that's not how you and I operate. When we're talking about an emergency fund, we tend to say 3 to 6 months of your income sitting in a savings account.
And
Like that's
the
the
reason
emergency fund aspect.
and the reason for the variance is it depends on how stable your income is. If you've got a guaranteed government job and your income never changes, yeah, you might only need 3 months. If you're a commercial real estate agent, you might get 3 paychecks a year, but they're really big paychecks. Like, okay, yeah, we might push that out to a year worth
You
of
might want 12 in that instance. Yeah.
right.
So, do you have an emergency fund, and how stable is it? And what I mean by stable is it really an emergency fund, or is it a fund that you tap into once a month and constantly take dollars from? If that's the case, it's not an emergency fund. It's just your checking account that happens to be bigger.
Or a savings account that's attached to a checking account, which is really
Right.
just a deferred spending account.
So if your cash flow is not in order, right, and you don't have that emergency fund set up appropriately, alternative investments is it may not be the right choice for you, especially from a risk standpoint, which we're going to get into more here a little bit later.
I would use a stronger word than may not be appropriate.
Fair. So that's number one. Number two is, how are you set up from a protection standpoint? Is your income protected the way that you want? Said another way, if you lost your income by 20%, like if you took a 20% pay cut this year, what would that do to you? Like bigger picture, if you lost 20% pay cut for the rest of your life, like for whatever reason, right? Because you can't go to work full time anymore. Who knows what that might look like? If your income's not protected, you got a big risk there that you probably should look at. Which
Absolutely.
takes us to number three, which is liquidity, which we've already kind of brought up because I brought up emergency fund and liquidity. Emergency fund is just that backup fund in the emergency aspect, right? It's really the negative conversation or the negative thought of, if I lose my job, or I got to go buy a new car, or whatever that look. I got to put a new furnace in the house, right? Like that's the
The
emergency fund.
transmission falls out of the car.
Exactly. Didn't that happen to you?
Yeah.
Liquidity, though, is how much access to money do you have? And Alex and I'd like to have, our rule of thumb is to have at least 12 months of your income accessible to you. Now, that does not mean that all has to be sitting in savings. Like we said, emergency fund is 3 to 6 months. You might have an investment account that's in all bonds, whatever it looks like, that's accessible to you. And maybe it's equivalent to 6 months of your income. Well, now combine 6 months of emergency fund, 6 months of this investment account. Now you have 12 months. Now you have liquidity. That's what we mean by liquidity.
And I mean, sometimes we wind like in it, there's a lot that goes into taking a look at the ratios between retirement, investments, and savings. The closer that we get to retirement, the bigger that we want savings to be. In an ideal circumstance, we wind up with these things being roughly a third, a third, a third when we get to retirement. Now, everyone's individual situation is a bit unique. Some people want more, some people want less. Like there's a lot of art behind what we do. There's also a lot of science behind what we do. So it's not a one size fits all, and so much of it depends on what your income level is, what the rest of your balance sheet looks like, and are you in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, your 60s, or beyond?
Right.
Because
So
all of that is going to affect it.
the reason we're really explaining this liquidity aspect is the rule that we're going to state is if you don't have proper liquidity, alternative investing doesn't make sense most likely for you because life happens. And when I say that terminology, immediately, like even when I say it to our clients, Alex, like immediately people go negative.
Mm-hmm.
And I get it. Like our industry has done that. It's almost like we try to scare people into liquidity.
Life has a tendency of doing that too.
But I'm talking about what about the opportunistic side of stuff, right? Like me entering the financial planning world, I wish I had more liquidity set up because it would have changed everything dramatically. And that was a huge opportunity for me.
I mean, heck, we were hanging out with a good friend of ours who's also in the industry this last week. And one of the things that he said was, oh, yeah, I had the opportunity to go buy a second cabin.
Right.
And like, if he didn't have the liquidity to be able to pull a couple $100,000, he wouldn't have had that opportunity.
So I think most people that are out there, I think and we've had this conversation before, but I think it's a great piece to bring up again is most people have two buckets of money. They've got their money sitting in cash and then they've got their money in their retirement plan and that's it.
Well, and it's not even like evenly distributed.
Oh no, it's like
It's
it's like 2% sitting in their savings account and 98% sitting in, their 401k, whatever allocation that looks like in their 401k. Maybe it's that target date fund where it's like a 90-10, 90% stocks, 10% bonds. So once you add all of that together, maybe they're at a 95-5.
right.
Right. So again, and the reason we're putting all of these pieces together is the alternative investments, they're non-correlated with the market. Well, they can be, and they can have higher risk depending on what you choose. For either maybe it's harder to sell that asset when you need it, like certain REITs you can't sell real quick. Gold, right? Like we've got one client right now that is sitting on a bunch of gold bars in their closet. Like they're actually having a hard time selling, right? Getting that handled. So there's liquidity in your balance sheet and then there's liquidity in the investment fund that you're in if it's an alternative investment. You have to look at all of these rather than chasing, which I think most people are actually doing when they think about alternative investments. They're chasing return.
Right. And sure, you might be able to get a better rate of return by having some allocation towards alternatives, whether it's private equity, private debt, REITs, structured notes, like RILAs. The list is just never ending of different potential things that we can invest in. And we need to understand these things before we start investing in them. B, we oftentimes want to dip our toe in as opposed to jump in with 2 feet. And we got to have our financial house in order before we start doing these things, because there is a real lack of liquidity and they are typically a lot more aggressive.
Yeah, I mean, stop and think about this for a second. Imagine you don't have, let's just say you have the emergency fund set up. Let's just say it's a given. Emergency fund's golden for this made up client that we're talking about. And let's just say their income is protected. Let's just say they handled number one and number two. So they said, I'm going to ignore Ryan's advice around and Alex's advice around liquidity, and we're going to take a step into the alternative investment world. We're going to buy X investment, but that X investment has an illiquidity issue where they can't sell at a relatively easy timeline, unless you say that's a 12-month timeline for fun, right? Something occurs, and we're going to say it's a positive thing, right? They have an opportunity where they want to buy into an actual real estate property, and it's a vacation property for them, for their family. If they want to sell or somehow get access to this alternative investment, they're probably going to have to pay a fee or something's going to occur where they may not get all of their money back. And essentially the risk that they took just blew up.
Well, oftentimes what you do is you submit something that says, I would like to sell 20,000 shares. And then the investment company goes, okay, cool. That's going to be a 10% fee. And we need to see how many people submit.
Let me see if we can do that. Exactly.
And so like then at a prearranged date, end of the month, end of the quarter, 2 weeks, or like whatever their time frame is, they'll go ahead and take a look at how many people submitted redemption requests and then fulfill them on an as they see fit basis. That might be 100%. It might be 0, or it might be someplace in between. And until like they get to that answer, like your money is tied up because we don't have control over it. It is 100% dependent upon like whatever the other structure is. Now, that's not all alternative investments.
No.
But it's some of them. And we need to understand those details.
We need to understand the details, which is the entire point of this, right? That's the opportunistic side. Now, if it's negative, it only gets even worse, right? Like the opportunistic side is like, okay, darn, I can't do this vacation property, which has been a dream of my family's. Well, I guess my dreams are down the tube. Forget the dreams down the tube. Sarcasm a little bit. Also kind of true. The negative side of stuff, like now it could get even worse. Maybe you're going into debt because you can't get the money, or right, who knows? So liquidity is a big piece. And then the last thing is net worth appropriate. And what I mean by that is some of these investments you can't even get access to unless you are an accredited investor, right? Or different, essentially different rules or
income levels, asset levels.
Yeah.
Like sometimes it's like, oh, this is only open to folks that have $1 million of investable assets.
Yep.
Not even $1 million of net worth, $1 million of investable assets. Like, oh, you're only able to put like 5% of your investable assets into this. Oh, well, I want to put, what, $100,000. Okay, great. Well, you need
right
$2 million to go ahead and get there. Like,
so it's not always accessible to you. Or, I mean, based on the previous 3 that we just spoke about, it may not make sense for you to do given what your balance sheet currently looks like. So we had a couple questions from certain clients that have brought up alternative investments. Plus, I think it's a common topic that is being brought up, and the media loves to they got to get your eyeballs somehow, right? Like, are you missing out on this awesome investment, right? I can just see the title now. So we wanted to, what's up?
And a lot of these things aren't regulated anywhere near as much.
Yeah.
Like we were talking with another advisor last week who like they had, was it a family member or was it a client who had been promised something from somebody selling, I believe it was gold. And like they were trying to get the company to honor the promise that they made.
Yep.
And the salesperson was long gone. And the company was like, nope, we would never do that.
Exactly. So again, alternative investments, whether or not it makes sense for you, hopefully these 4 items you take to heart, and you look at how your balance sheet looks today, so you can make an informed decision. Which takes us to the question of the day, Alex.
Our question today is: are you putting the cart before the horse when it comes to your investment choices? So it's a lot of the same stuff that we talked about earlier today, of making sure that your balance sheet is in order before you start doing a whole lot of investing, whether it's traditional investing or alternative investing.
So head over to beerandmoney.net, and that's a great spot for you to see either answer the question, or maybe if this episode spurred a question for you, it's a great way to interact with us. There's a contact us spot at the top, and you can send us your question. Or there's other episodes, right? I forget what episode we're on nowadays, right? So there's a lot of episodes there. Make sure you check them out. The YouTube channel is up and running, so you can check us out on YouTube, or the beerandmoney.net has all the videos sitting there as well. So look, we started this podcast to be a resource for you so that you can live the life that you want and hopefully make financial decisions, informed financial decisions, rather than chasing something that you may or may not want. So as always, we hope this episode was valuable for you. And Mr. Collins,
cheers.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not to be construed as tax, legal, or investment advice. Although the information has been gathered from sources believed to be reliable, please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information should be relied upon only when coordinated with individual professional advice. Guest speakers and their firms are not affiliated with or endorsed by Park Avenue Securities, Guardian, or Quantified Financial Partners, and opinions stated are their own. Guardian, its subsidiaries, agents, and employees do not provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. Consult your tax, legal, or accounting professional regarding your individual situation. All investments and investment strategies contain risk and may lose value. This material is intended for general public use. By providing this content, Park Avenue Securities LLC is not undertaking to provide investment advice or a recommendation for any specific individual or situation, or to otherwise act in a fiduciary capacity. Please contact a financial representative for guidance and information that is specific to your individual situation. Ryan and Alex are registered representatives and financial advisors of Park Avenue Securities LLC, OSJ 200 Market Street, Suite 1850, Portland, Oregon 97201. Phone number 503-221-1226. Securities products and advisory services offered through Park Avenue Securities, member FINRA, SIPC. Financial representatives of the Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, Guardian, New York, New York. Park Avenue Securities is a wholly owned subsidiary of Guardian. Quantified Financial Partners is not an affiliate or subsidiary of Park Avenue Securities or Guardian. Ryan Burklow, CA Insurance License Number 0K24924. Alexander Collins, CA Insurance License Number 0H24806.
Pinpoint number 2024-172084, expiration March 2026.